In my previous life, I married my childhood sweetheart, and we were very happy after marriage. Unexpectedly, he brought back a concubine. I played the role of a good wife every day and even took care of my concubine personally when she gave birth. In the end, he and the concubine lived in harmony, and I pissed myself off to death. Later, I was reborn on the night when my concubine gave birth to a child. My husband was stomping outside the door. I changed my virtuous nature and slapped him in the face. Either we get a divorce, or put the concubine's child back into your belly. 1. Grace is giving birth. The husband said with a gloomy face, "You are not allowed to disturb her." I have excruciating abdominal pain. I finally realized that I had been reborn on the night that concubine Grace Clark gave birth to a child. That night, I was so tired that I had a miscarriage. I cried out in pain to Joshua Garcia, but he told me not to disturb Grace Clark, who was giving birth. He said with a blaming look on his face, "Even if we are childhood sweethearts, if you can't get pregnant, you are still guilty of one of the 7 sins." I raised my hand and slapped him in the face. "Joshua, let's get divorced." My husband looked at me with disappointment. "You are right to be jealous, but your husband is your heaven. How can you beat your heaven? Take your husband as your heaven. Take the child as the main thread. You must listen to your husband in everything." I was so blind to marry a man like Joshua. I asked the maid to help me leave, but Joshua grabbed me. He was stubborn and held my wrist. "You can't leave. This is Grace's most important day. It's also the first child we've welcomed into the Garcia family. How can you leave? If they have a baby, do I have to welcome it with drums and gongs?" I was in so much pain that I was a little unconscious, and even Joshua's face in front of me turned into 2 or 3. He gripped it really hard. I couldn't shake his hand off, so I just begged, "My stomach hurts, please let me go." Joshua had sharp eyes and immediately saw blood seeping from under my skirt. He frowned and said, "You are becoming more and more unruly. You don't even call me husband. You are having your day. You shouldn't have gone in to see Grace just now. What if you bump into the child?" I laughed angrily. "Joshua, this is not a day. This is our child. How can a pregnant woman bleed continuously?" Joshua was stunned. A trace of panic flashed across his dark eyes. "You lied to me. When did you get pregnant?" I felt dizzy and fell to the ground. Joshua frowned and picked me up by the waist. "Stop pretending." Then, I fell into a warm and broad embrace, with a faint scent of bamboo. Such an embrace once made me infatuated. But now, I just felt disgusted and pushed him away. Joshua staggered after being pushed. He was stunned for a moment and said in disbelief, "What are you doing?" "I'll let the doctor take a look at you." The mansion has already hired a doctor. I hired it to help Grace Clark give birth to a child, but I didn't expect it to be used on me. At this time, Grace Clark's maid suddenly rushed out of the room crying and pitifully pulled the doctor. "Sir, Aunt Clark is having a difficult delivery and the doctor needs to come in." The maidservant kept pulling the doctor. My face was pale and the blood under my skirt was soaked through. The doctor was in a dilemma and looked at Joshua. "Hey, Mr. Garcia, who should I see first?" Joshua looked solemn. Finally, he waved his hand and asked the doctor to enter the delivery room. I was bleeding more and more, and Joshua's hands were all covered in blood. He didn't despise me this time and coaxed me. "Just bear with it for now. I've been neglecting you recently, and you're angry, but you can't lie to me about your period. If I'm really pregnant, how are we going to live in the future?" I said weakly, Yes, I was angry with you. I lied to you." Soon, my eyes went dark and I passed out completely. 2. Once, I deceived Joshua by telling him I was pregnant. We were newlyweds at that time, and Joshua and I would spend every night together until midnight. My mother-in-law didn't like that I came from a family of military generals, so she asked me to greet her and serve her tea at the first hour of the morning every day. I dare not disobey. Joshua was busy with government affairs during the day and didn't notice it. After a month, I was so sleepy at night that I couldn't lift my head. He kissed my face and said, "You have nothing to do at home every day. Why are you still so lazy?" I don't accept it. I touched my belly and said seriously, "Don't touch me, I'm pregnant." That night, he didn't bother me. When I poured tea for my mother-in-law at dawn, she was not as harsh as usual. I then learned that Joshua was so excited that he couldn't sleep all night and told everyone that I was pregnant. Now, even the dogs in the house knew that I was pregnant. Joshua looked at himself in the bronze mirror and said, "Stella, I'm going to be a father soon. How about growing a nice beard in the future?" That year, we were newlywed. In order to wait for me to reach the age of 15, he waited until he was 24 before getting married. The whole house was waiting for the non-existent baby in my belly, which made me very uneasy, so I thought of a way to hide it from the world. I faked a miscarriage. This method could not be hidden from the doctor's pulse diagnosis. When Joshua found out he was cheated, he was very angry and ignored me for several days. He just tried to hide this scandal for me from the whole government. He looked at me with red eyes. "Stella Allen, don't lie to me about our offspring again." I agreed. At that moment, I realized that Joshua loved children very much, and after we got married, he had said many times that he wanted to have 2 boys and 1 girl with me. But I don't like children at all. I pretended to be coquettish. No, you should find another woman to have the baby with." He ignored me for several days. I was puzzled, but his personal servant told me, "Madam, the master does not want to take a concubine. He only wants to raise children with you." I know Joshua likes me very much. He loved me so much that if he couldn't find me in bed in the middle of the night, he would look for me all over the yard. He loved me so much that he married me, who came from a military family, against his parents' orders. He loved me so much that he didn't plan to take a concubine after marriage. As I grew older, in the 2nd year of my marriage to him, my belly was still not moving. My mother-in-law sarcastically mocked me. "You seduced my son when you were still young, and now you are still a chicken that can't lay eggs. I don't know what shameful things you did in the past." I had a falling out with her. Everyone in the house knew that my mother-in-law and I were not on good terms, and Joshua had a big fight with his mother over me. Afterwards, he held my hand and said, "My mother was just eager to have a grandchild, but you disobeyed her in public. Go back and apologize to her." "I don't want to." He sighed. "Go back and apologize to my mother, okay? I will follow your wishes and not worry about the matter of the heir." I looked aggrieved. Fortunately, Joshua was very obedient to me, and I had no children, so I felt extremely guilty and could only work harder at housework and serve my aunt more diligently every day. Later, Joshua was transferred to another position for a whole year. The mother-in-law could no longer hide her sarcastic face. "Since you can't have children, you should let Uner take a concubine. There is no one in the world as jealous as you. You want our Garcia family to be childless." I said expressionlessly, "It's my husband who doesn't want to take a concubine." Joshua's mother and I hated each other in the mansion. After a year of hardship, Joshua came back. The day he returned home, it was a rainy day. The continuous drizzle fell on his scarlet official robe. He fell from the sedan chair with a girl who was looking forward to seeing Gu Shenghui in his arms. This year, he had a concubine. I stood at the door and made a loud noise, not allowing the girl to step into the threshold. Joshua took off his official robe and put it on the girl to protect her from the rain. There was a hint of anger on his face, and he kept saying that I was ignorant. He said, "If you weren't jealous, I wouldn't have told you earlier. If you could have children, why would I need to take a concubine? I was speechless. The girl looked at me with gritted teeth and banged her head against the door of Garcia's house, her head bleeding. She said weakly, "Lord Garcia, I am of lowly status, so you don't have to hurt the relationship between you and your wife because of me." This collision softened Joshua's heart. His tone was sad, and he begged me, "Stella, I owe you this. I will only take her as a concubine in this life, and I want to have a child." The girl timidly covered her belly, and I realized that she was pregnant with my husband's child. I looked at this star-crossed couple in the rain, feeling bitter in my heart, but I swallowed my grievance and let her in. Just because the concubine is pregnant with Joshua's child, I love her and take care of her personally. Joshua often praises me for being virtuous in public. But he didn't know that I was getting thinner and thinner due to fatigue, and the innocent smile on my face was no longer there because he hadn't looked at me for a long time. He stayed by my concubine's side every day and said to me, "Grace is pregnant, so she is naturally a little bit delicate. You must not be angry." I nodded numbly. Joshua forgot that before I got married, I was also a spoiled little girl. He also said that no matter what happened, he would only spoil me in this life. Later, Grace Clark gave birth to a son. Joshua would rush to her yard after work. He told me, "The child is still young and cannot leave his father. You must not lose your temper." For 5 whole years, thanks to my hard work, my mother-in-law was at ease, my concubine was proud, but I was depressed and became increasingly ill. During the Mid-Autumn Festival that year, Joshua hadn't appeared in front of me for half a year, so I sent someone to invite him. The maid came back with a guilty look on her face. There was no Joshua behind her, and she stammered, "My lord said that since it is Mid-Autumn Festival, why don't you ask Madam to go to Aunt Clark's courtyard, where she will be waiting for you?" I spat out a mouthful of blood. My illness has come to an end. Before I died, I just wanted to see Joshua one last time as I was helped into the Grace Clark courtyard. All I saw was Joshua holding Grace Clark in the small pavilion, admiring the moon with one hand and holding his young son with the other. A harmonious and beautiful scene. Grace Clark suddenly asked, "Husband, if you don't go to see your wife, will she be angry?" "How could that be? Of course you are more important." When I heard this, I suddenly vomited a lot of blood. I couldn't hold on any longer and died in front of Grace Clark's yard. That year, I was only 21 years old. In my previous life, I compromised and took care of everyone in the house, served my aunt, and respected my concubine, but in the end I ended up dead. 3. But I never thought that I could go back to the day when I had a miscarriage in my previous life. I was dizzy with pain. Joshua went to call the doctor. He stood beside me with an absent-minded look. I knew he was thinking about Grace Clark, who was about to give birth. Until the doctor looked serious. He said to Joshua, "Mrs. Garcia's pregnancy was not stable. She has been overworked recently. She has had a miscarriage. If she takes good rest in the future, she will be fine." Joshua frowned. He looked at me. My skirt was covered in blood and I was in a mess. I had no expression, no sadness, no resentment, just like a pool of stagnant water. He suddenly moved his lips with difficulty. "Stella, you are pregnant. Why didn't you tell me?" I turned my face away and closed my eyes tightly, not wanting to look at him again. Finally, I said sarcastically, "Joshua, I had a miscarriage. Don't you have any fault at all?" Joshua's lips looked a little pale. His hands trembled slightly in his wide sleeves. In my previous life, I also had a miscarriage. Before Grace Clark gave birth, she was worried that someone was going to murder her and her baby. Joshua told me, "Grace couldn't sleep for several days. She was afraid of you." He asked me to stay away for a while. I said nothing, packed my bags, and went to the Garcia family's farm. Before leaving, the moon was full, and I watched the two of them loving each other in Garcia's house, feeling empty in my heart. On the day Grace Clark was due to give birth, she cried and begged me to accompany her. Joshua sent someone to write to me, "Madam, Grace said you are the most capable person, and she wants you to come back when she gives birth." He had someone take me back home. After the tiring journey, I felt a dull pain in my stomach. When Joshua learned that I had abdominal pain, he laughed and said, "As soon as you came back, you acted like a spoiled child to make me love you more. But you shouldn't say these things when Grace is having labor pains. She is in much more pain than you are." He doesn't believe me. Later, I had a miscarriage, and that evening I received the happy news that Grace Clark had successfully given birth to a son. Joshua was a new father, and he was only sad for a moment about our child. He said, "We'll have children eventually, just take care of yourself," and went to accompany Grace Clark. I felt heartbroken and cried in bed for several days. I even fell seriously ill. Only the maid knows that this child is the one I have been looking forward to for a long time. I didn't like children, but for Joshua, I waited for him in my mansion for a year, drinking Chinese medicine to regulate my body, and my stomach was filled with bitterness. But when I was in the most pain, Joshua was with Grace Clark during her confinement. They watched their children grow up little by little. Joshua didn't know all this. He had a beautiful concubine and a cute baby son. 4. In this life, I still lost this child. The doctor held up the medicine box with regret. "Master Garcia, please comfort the lady." Joshua's face was stiff, and he walked towards me step by step. Each step was extremely stiff. He hasn't hugged me for a long time, because Grace Clark doesn't like the smell of me on him. When he reached out to hug me, I gently moved away, eyes full of resistance. Joshua knew he was in the wrong, so he withdrew his hand and said softly, "Stella, if you want to cry, just cry. You don't have to hold it in." This time, I didn't throw myself into his arms and cry. I wiped the blood that stained me over and over again. After marrying into the Garcia family, I always seemed to be covered in scars. Finally, I wiped it clean, with determination in my eyes. "Joshua, let's get divorced." Joshua's face changed. He seemed to have heard a joke, with impatience and scorn flashing in his eyes. "Stella, don't be willful. Where can you go if you leave me?" The sneer in his eyes chilled me to the bone. It turned out that he also knew that I had no home. Back then, I was young and stubborn, determined to spend my life with this man. My father was in a high position and never formed any faction, but Joshua was a member of the prince's faction. My father had long told me, "If you insist on marrying that Lu guy, then don't be my daughter." In order to marry this man, I severed ties with my parents and abandoned my status as a daughter of a general. On my wedding day, there were no matchmakers or betrothals, no books or ceremonies. It's just a marriage certificate. Only a small sedan chair was used to carry me to the Garcia family's house. That day, my pampered mother cried and chased after my sedan chair, begging, "Stella, please don't marry him. I will find you someone better." Finally, she stumbled and fell into a mud pit, unable to get up. My mother had a respectable life, but at that moment she cried like a helpless child. After that, I never went back to the Allen family, and I had never seen my parents before I died in the Garcia mansion. After all this effort, only a few years later, the man laughed at me for having no home. I took off the jade bracelet on my hand. This jade bracelet was put on my wrist by Joshua himself when he married me. He said with a smile in his eyes, "Whoever wears it is mine." The jade is there and the love is there. Today, the jade bracelet is still as bright and shiny as ever. In front of him, I threw the jade hard to the ground, and the fragments flew everywhere and scratched his fingertips. Joshua's breath was choked, and he looked a little dazed. Maybe he remembered that I was once the girl he loved and cherished. My eyes were cold, and I curled my lips and said, "Back then, I severed ties with my parents for you because I could afford this love. Now our love is gone. The jade is broken, and there is nothing left to remember us by." A divorce letter that had been written long ago was thrown in front of him. The divorce agreement had been written in the previous life, but the stupid girl in the previous life forgave him over and over again, always hoping in her heart that he would change his mind. But what if I change my mind? Every crack is a betrayal of my sincerity. Even if we can get back together, I can't live my life pretending. Joshua stared at the divorce papers. Suddenly he smiled, picked up the papers with both hands, and tore them up bit by bit in front of me. He suddenly grabbed my chin and said, "Back then, it was you who insisted on marrying me, wasn't it? You're playing hard to get, just to make me love you more. You have become more and more ignorant over the years. It's all my fault that I spoiled you." The cool warmth of his bony hands against my face made me feel sick to my stomach. I spat at him fiercely. "Joshua, you make me sick." When Joshua heard the word disgusting, his eyes stung. He picked me up forcefully, pressed me on the bed, and said with a smile, "Don't you want me to pamper you more? I will let you know now who your husband, your God, is. Don't you want a child? Let's have another one." There was a loud thunder outside. The maidservant didn't even dare to breathe. I pushed the man in front of me away. "Joshua, you beast." As I cursed, I began to dry heave in disgust. My dry heaving made Joshua lose his mind. He seemed to be deaf, and his eyes were terribly red. "What am I disgusted by? Don't you love me the most? I just took a concubine, but what did you do behind my back?" The rain hit the eaves. My screams echoed in the room, and the maid cried and pleaded for me. "Sir, the lady is weak and said something angry. Please let her go." Joshua seemed not to hear. He had long lost his mind. I was pushed so hard that I lost my strength and reached for the vase, smashing it hard on his head. The only sound in the room was the sound of raindrops falling on the eaves. Joshua paused, touching his bleeding head, and smiled. "Stella, you are great." My hands were shaking and tears of fear came out of my eyes. Joshua was stunned for a moment, then lowered his head and tried to comfort me by holding back his tears as he did in the past. I turned my face away in disgust. She used the remaining porcelain pieces in her hand to press against her thin, white, and fragile neck, preventing him from getting any closer. I smiled softly. Stella, I would rather die in glory than live in disgrace." 5. It's windy and rainy outside. Suddenly, there was a flurry of footsteps and a loud knock on the door. It was Grace Clark's maid again. She panted, "It's bad, sir. Please go and see Aunt Clark. She couldn't find you after giving birth to the little boy, and she was so anxious that she went blind." It's this maid again. Every time Joshua stepped into my room, this maid acted like a death messenger. Aunt Clark was either having a miscarriage or trying to commit suicide. Every time, Joshua would put down what he was doing and get nervous. He explained to me, "Grace is pregnant. You have to be more sensible and not get angry with her." Every time, I pretended to be nonchalant and said considerately, "Go ahead." Every night he was away, the weather was as cold as water. My heart aches. Later, when Joshua entered my room again, I tacitly drank tea with him while waiting for the maid to arrive. He knew that Grace Clark would be happy to call him away, but he still pretended to come to my room and then left in a hurry. Little did I know that I was the one who was hurt the most. Now, this maid arrived just in time. As usual, she knocked on the door without any rules, as if she was afraid that the people in the room could not hear her. "Sir, Aunt Clark just gave birth to a child, and the young master also wants to see his father." First time in my life. I don't think Grace Clark's maid is that annoying. A little light appeared in my dim eyes, except for Joshua, who was stiff and sat beside me like a piece of wood. He seemed not to hear. Until Joshua looked at me huddled in the corner. My lips were a little pale due to the miscarriage, and I looked at him warily. There was pain in his eyes, but he changed into a gentle look. "You just lost your child." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you." I sneered. The knocking on the door almost broke it down. Joshua frowned, not knowing who had angered him. He became angry and shouted at the door, "If I don't want to go, then I won't go. You are just a bastard born to a concubine, get out." The knocking on the door gradually became quieter. Grace Clark's maidservant outside the door turned pale when she heard what she heard, and she left quickly. I stared at him with a cold gaze, which seemed to be mocking, but also sympathetic. Joshua choked up for a moment. "Stella, I've been with you. What else do you want from me?" I took out another divorce letter from under the covers and slowly pushed it in front of him. "I don't want you. I just want a divorce." His face was gloomy. "Stella, how many divorce letters have you written?" I was in a trance. "How many divorce letters did you write in your previous life?" Every time I felt disappointed and gave up on Joshua, I would write a divorce letter. At first, I would accuse him of all his betrayal and sins, and my letter would be filled with tears of grievance. Later, I stopped crying. My pen and ink were dry, and the divorce letter was so short that it only had a few scribbled words. "Our love is gone, and it is hard for us to grow old together. I won't tell Joshua about this." Joshua didn't wait for my answer. He pinched my jaw hard and forced me to lift my head. "You love me so much. Don't play it too big this time. If you want me to pamper you, I will give it to you. Why play these tricks?" "Trick?" I stared at him expressionlessly and asked, "You keep making excuses, but you still can't let me go?" Every word made Joshua's face darken. His face was gloomy, and he tore up the divorce letter. "Stella, I can indulge your temper, but don't even think about getting a divorce in this life. You belong to the Garcia family in life, and you belong to the Garcia family in death." My eyes darkened. I know he is possessive, but even though I don't love you anymore, I don't want to let go. Finally, he left in a rage. Before he left, he shouted to the servant, "Why don't you change my bloody clothes quickly? How can I go see Grace?" The servant didn't dare to disobey him. Just when he touched the bloodstain on Joshua's robe, he looked at me with pity. After Joshua left, the maid crawled out from the corner and cried to me, "Miss, let's go home, back to Alan's house." I can't stand it any longer. Alan's house, these two words make my heart ache. It is clearly only a few streets away from the solemn and dignified general's mansion, which is my home, but I feel as if there are mountains and rivers between me and it is impossible for me to go back. My eyes dimmed a little. The maid continued to persuade her, "Miss, I actually lied to you. On the day of your wedding, I didn't run away to find you. It was Madame Shen who asked me to follow you. She has always loved you." I was stunned. I suddenly came to my senses and asked her tremblingly, "Did my mother ask you to come to me?" The maid nodded. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore and cried while biting the quilt. 6. Joshua went to see Grace Clark. Grace Clark, who had been brooding over a night of grievances and hatred, did not even let Joshua in. Joshua stood in front of the door, his face livid. "Grace, open the door. Let me go in and see you and your son." Grace Clark was so angry that she had the door blocked. She cried, "I risked my life to give birth to your child, and you promised me that you would never visit her again." Joshua remained silent for a long time. His voice was so soft that it could be blown away by the wind. She is my wife after all. Grace Clark cried even more sadly. Is a miscarried child more important than us? My lord, you promised me that you would not touch her when I was pregnant with Andrew. In fact, Joshua did not break his promise. That night, after Joshua got drunk with his colleagues, he walked to my Wutong garden in a daze, and we had a night of passion and had a child. From the very beginning, it was not the child that its biological father expected. Outside the door, Joshua said nothing more. He listened quietly as Grace Clark scolded him for being unfaithful, for not being gentle enough, and for going back on his word. That's enough. He suddenly showed an impatient look on his face. He didn't coax Grace Clark as usual. She had a miscarriage. I should be with her. He looked disappointed and turned away. Grace Clark cried all the time during her confinement. She smashed everything she could and even killed a lowly maid. For a whole month, Joshua slept alone in the study every day and did not visit Grace Clark and her children. I take good care of myself every day, just wanting to heal this weak body and get a divorce as soon as possible. One late night, my cat is lost. When I picked up the kitten, its claws scratched me and left a bloody mark. I cried out in pain. A tall figure stood in front of me. Joshua had become a little thinner. In the moonlight, I seemed to be able to outline what he looked like before. Gentle and affectionate. He stared at my hand and frowned, his eyes filled with pain. Does it hurt? He took a step forward and was about to grab my hand. I avoided it. Joshua raised his hand and awkwardly retracted it into his wide sleeves, as if nothing had happened. He smiled warmly. I remember when we first met, you also climbed up a tree to save a kitten. I don't remember. I hugged the cat and turned my face away indifferently. It's late at night. You should go back. After saying that, I turned around and went back to the yard. Joshua stood there for a long time, and suddenly he pleaded, "Isn't it enough that I don't go to see her anymore?" The wind blew. No one answered him. Only the sky is as cool as water, and the night is endless. 7. Grace Clark is out of confinement after giving birth. She humbly carried the lunch box and went to see Joshua, but was turned away. I was sitting under the porch enjoying the cool air when I happened to see the scene. She was dressed in pink and had red eyes, which reminded me of the day when Joshua brought her home. She was also so fragile. As she passed by the corridor, she said to me with red eyes, "Madam, I was wrong. I should never have disobeyed you." I turned to look at the fish by the pond. Grace Clark saw this, and she knelt down and kowtowed to me. "But Andrew is innocent. He is just a child. Please let him see his father." I smiled and said, "You want me to persuade Joshua to meet you and your son?" She looked at me greedily and said, "Madam is virtuous and kind. For the sake of the peace of this family, you must persuade the master to take care of Andrew. He still calls you mother." Mother? When they were in favor, they didn't remember me as their mother. In my previous life, when Grace Clark was in favor, I hugged her son, and the child broke out in hives that same day. She insisted that I was the one who harmed him and brought bad luck to him. I was charged with the crime of murdering a bastard. Later, when the child was included in the family tree, he was named as my legitimate son, but he never called me mother. Grace Clark said, "Madam, why are you making things difficult for a child? He is my child, so he naturally wants to call me mother." Today, the mother and son are out of favor. Grace Clark was targeting me again. I sneered. "Aunt Clark, my husband said that he is just a concubine's illegitimate son. If he doesn't want to see him, I can't persuade him." Grace Clark's face turned pale. She quickly stood up and said humiliatingly, "Madam, why do you have to humiliate me?" I looked at her calmly. "Isn't your son a concubine's son?" She was shaking with anger. Seeing this, my maid, who was used to seeing me being bullied, was also not merciful. Isn't Aunt Clark very capable? It was easy to seduce Master Garcia before, but why do you have to ask our madam for help now? That's right, you are just a concubine, not presentable. Grace Clark blanched. She never acknowledged her status as a concubine. She was the legitimate daughter of a seventh-rank official. Even though her family property was confiscated and she became a skinny horse in Yangzhou, she still looked down on concubines from the bottom of her heart. At first, Joshua wanted to buy her to be my maid for calligraphy and painting, but she took the opportunity to seduce Joshua. Ever since she entered the Garcia mansion, I have a kind personality and I have never been harsh on her, but she thought I was a pushover and wanted to favor my concubine over my wife, relying on the fact that I was pregnant. In the previous life, after I died, she became Joshua's legitimate wife as she wished. In this life, I can't let her live so comfortably. 8. Grace Clark turned pale with humiliation. She returned to the yard crying. She picked up the child and smashed him on the bed to vent her anger. This incident alarmed the entire Garcia mansion. The child fainted on the spot. That night, doctors came and went, and Joshua finally went to her yard. Inside the room, Grace Clark rocked the wooden bed tenderly, crying, "My child, you are just a concubine's child, not presentable. It is better for you to die and suffer less." The child is very young, but his features look very similar to Joshua. At that moment, Joshua's heart suddenly softened. He held the child in his arms, looking at Grace Clark's gentle and timid appearance, and the two of them reconciled their past grudges. After 2 months of being ignored, Grace Clark has learned her lesson. She no longer relied on her favor to be arrogant, but said gently and considerately, "Sir, please go visit the lady more often. I think she is thinking about you." Joshua frowned suddenly. Ever since Joshua and I had a falling out, I no longer managed the affairs of the house, nor did I serve tea to my mother-in-law. He naturally knew why. It's just that I don't love him anymore. Grace Clark held the child and suddenly smiled. "Madam, you haven't held Andrew yet, right? I heard that women who often hold children are more likely to give birth." Joshua stared at the child, a hint of tenderness flashing across his face. It is the 3rd month since the Garcia family had a baby. It is spring. It was drizzling in the yard. Joshua's servants kept asking me to go to the Garcia family ancestral hall. In my previous life, I went to the Garcia family ancestral hall, and Grace Clark was there too. Joshua held Andrew in his arms and made him my legitimate son. "I don't want to." He then said, "Stella, why bother to fight for this? You are infertile and you will never have children in your lifetime." That year, I was only in my 20s. But he hurt me so much that I was speechless with the words, "It's difficult to have children," and forced me to include Grace Clark's children in the family tree. That day, countless people gathered around Grace Clark's child, but I was the only one feeling sad, and the silent humiliation lingered in my heart. And the man who once took the trouble to coax me is now holding his child with another woman, completely unaware of the situation. From that day on, I just gave up. This time, the matter of registering Andrew in the family tree is going to repeat the same mistake. The servant knelt down and kowtowed, insisting that I go to the ancestral hall. I frowned and said to the servant, "From now on, I will not interfere with anything Joshua does. You don't have to discuss it with me. I only want to discuss one thing with him, and that is divorce." As soon as I finished speaking, I saw Joshua standing outside the door. The expectation in his dark eyes dimmed and turned into anger. No one in the entire yard dared to speak. During the stalemate, I looked away and didn't look at Joshua. Joshua's servant suddenly knelt down and begged, "Madam, please, Master Garcia has lost his appetite recently because of you." He has you in his heart. After hearing this, I just smiled. If he had me in his heart, why would he force me to support Grace Clark's child as his legitimate son? If he had me in his heart, how could my child have no chance of being born? If he had me in his heart, why did I die young in my previous life? Maybe this smile is too cold. Joshua strode forward and took my wrist in his hand. Stella, this is a serious matter. You need to go to the ancestral temple. I pulled away from him in disgust. Don't touch me, disgusting. Joshua hastily let go. After a while, the nanny brought Andrew and put the child in my hands. Joshua said in a flattering tone, "This is Andrew. You haven't hugged him yet. Hug him." I held the swaddle. Somewhat soft. I don't feel anything. In my previous life, I didn't even have the qualifications to touch him, just because Grace Clark didn't want to. But I knew that Joshua would adopt him under my name at the ancestral hall, but give him to Grace Clark to raise. I seemed to remember something. I looked up and said to Joshua, "Let's go to the ancestral hall." A look of joy appeared on his brow, and when he was about to hold an umbrella for me, I opened my own umbrella, shielding myself from the March drizzle, and walked towards the ancestral hall step by step. Joshua was left standing behind. 9. When Joshua and I arrived at the ancestral temple together, the elders of the Garcia family looked dissatisfied. Grace Clark stood next to her mother-in-law, looking submissive and complacent, and I knew what was going on. I laughed and said, "What do you think of today's situation?" The elders of the Garcia family look at the nose with their eyes and the heart with their nose. They looked solemn. "You and Joshua have been married for 3 years, but you have no children. Andrew is the only male in the family now. We want to adopt him under your name and make him the eldest son. As the mistress of the Garcia family, do you agree to this?" Eyes surrounded me from all directions like flowing water. I don't make any noise. I looked at Joshua and asked him, "Master Garcia, what do you think?" Joshua was a little confused by the distant Mr. Garcia. He said gently, "You are my wife, so I will listen to you." After hearing this, I turned to the many tablets in the Garcia family and glanced at Grace Clark, who looked nervous. She naturally hoped that the child was a legitimate son. I said in a clear voice, "A mere bastard wants to use me to become the eldest son. I don't agree." Deathly silence spread to every corner of the ancestral hall. Grace Clark looked embarrassed. My mother-in-law pursed her lips tightly, as if scolding me for being ignorant. Just like in the previous life, the head of the Garcia family had a gloomy look on his face, and they pointed at my nose and cursed. "You have been in the Garcia family for 3 years, and all your food, clothing, and expenses are provided by the Garcia family." But they didn't have any children, so I had no choice but to make Andrew the eldest son. "Otherwise, the Garcia family will divorce you." This sentence once struck my heart like thunder, making me anxious and uneasy. But in this life, I ordered the maid to come forward, take out a letter of divorce, and present it to Joshua. I looked around at the people in the Garcia family with a cold gaze and said in a clear voice, "Lord Garcia, there is a more appropriate way to make Joshua the eldest son, which is to make his biological mother the principal wife. I have no children, and I will never have any children in the future. There is naturally someone more suitable to sit in this position." When these words were spoken, everyone looked shocked. If a woman is divorced, she will be despised no matter whether she sets up her own family or returns to her parents' home. In this world, many women are divorced because their husbands hate them, but I have never seen a woman begging to be divorced. The head of the Garcia family looked shocked. "Have you thought it through?" I nodded solemnly. Joshua's forehead was bulging with veins, and he held my hand with a trembling hand. He said word by word, "Stella, Joshua, will not divorce my wife." I sneered. Mr. Garcia is so upright. He certainly doesn't want to force me. I just want the divorce letter. To leave you completely. I won't allow you to do that, Stella. Joshua's eyes were red. I won't allow you to say that about yourself. You have no children. I will find you a son. I sneered. How to find it? As soon as he finished speaking, Joshua looked at Grace Clark and showed hope to the child in his arms. Give it to me. Grace Clark held her young son in her arms and stepped back, as if she was holding on to a lifeline. My lord, what are you doing? His face was full of anger, completely different from his usual gentle appearance, and he yelled at Grace Clark, Give me the child. Several wet nurses held Grace Clark down and let Joshua take Andrew away. Grace Clark's cries suddenly echoed throughout the ancestral hall. Joshua held the child in front of me and said in a flattering way, Stella, if you want Andrew, he will be your child from now on, and you can raise him at your knees. I smiled and said, Mr. Garcia, are you serious? Joshua said cautiously, I'll give you whatever you want. Please don't leave, okay? Grace Clark breaks free from her nurse. She lunged at us. She bit Joshua's wrist and madly snatched the child away, saying desperately, This is my child, sir. Everyone looked at this scene. No one spoke. They just wanted Andrew to be a legitimate son, but it didn't matter who the child's mother was. I looked at the fragile Grace Clark and sighed. If this child is given to me, what will Aunt Clark do? Joshua's expression relaxed, and he said mercilessly, I will send her away tomorrow, and I will make sure no one in the house mentions the child's biological mother again. Stella, stop making trouble. Let's live a good life together, just like before. Grace Clark's crying gradually stopped. She looked at Joshua in astonishment and dug her fingers into the flesh, causing blood to seep out and leave streaks of blood on the child's swaddling clothes. She stopped crying. Instead, there were soft whimpers. I nodded nonchalantly and looked at the crying baby in the cradle. I felt annoyed but didn't show it on my face. I stroked the child's cheek and looked at Joshua. But he doesn't look like me at all. I can have my own children. Joshua, you're the one who got me into this state. I wiped the milk smell off my hands with disgust. Joshua was terrified. He hugged me tightly and said, Stella, if you don't like Andrew, we are still young, so let's have another child. I looked at him intently. Not again, Joshua. I'm disgusted with you. Joshua stood there for a long time. He may be able to remember the 13-year-old girl who said with all her heart, Joshua, I love you. 10. I remember when I was 13. I met Joshua, who had just passed the imperial examination and was parading through the streets in a warm red official robe. I grew up in the vast yellow sand. On a whim, I picked up a slingshot and wanted to knock the white jade hairpin off his head. The bullet hit Joshua in the eye socket. He fell to the ground. He was blind for several days. My father was so angry that he carried me, dressed as a man, to apologize. Joshua's mother hated me so much that she insisted, Joshua has a bright future ahead of him. If he goes blind, his life will be ruined. I was at a loss as I thought of the high-spirited young man on the horse that day and blurted out, Then I'll take care of him for the rest of his life. Joshua is such a gentle person. He always consoled me. Now that things have come to this, don't use your slingshot to hit people again. I felt extremely guilty, so I disguised myself as a man and lived with him. Suddenly, one day, he suddenly said, Shinju, you are a girl, right? My face turned red. His face turned cold. You can go back. My Garcia family has countless servants. We don't need Miss Shen to serve us personally. I panicked and hurriedly grabbed his robe, saying bitterly, Joshua, I like you. That day, jujube flowers were falling in the yard. It has been 7 or 8 years since I met him, and we have broken through countless shackles to become husband and wife. If there is a day to come back, Stella would rather die in the yellow sand in this life, working as a female doctor in the army, than meet the top scholar in the imperial examination in Beijing. The Garcia family's ancestral hall has never been as lofty as it is today. The sound of a woman crying. The child's cry gradually faded, and Grace Clark seemed to have lost her soul. My child would rather die than be someone else's son. Everyone was shocked to find that Grace Clark's bloody hands were tightly covering the child's face, and the little body was gradually losing its warmth. And she fell to the ground, mad. Joshua's eyes were dead. Stella, everything is back to the way it was before. Don't be angry. I felt ridiculous and just shook my head. I can't go back. Joshua suddenly pushed me in front of the tablets of my ancestors. He grabbed my neck and threatened, Stella, if you want to leave me, I will turn you into a tablet in the Garcia family. You said you would never leave me in this life. I was strangled to the point of suffocation. The Garcia family elders looked on coldly. Garcia's mother sneered. Children and grandchildren have their own blessings. A woman who makes everyone in the house restless should be taught a lesson. It turns out that the Garcia mansion, where I have served wholeheartedly for 3 years, is also very cold. I smiled sarcastically. At this time, several people broke into the ancestral hall. The 3 men in the lead were all strong and tall, with a look of righteousness on their faces. My father waved his spear and pointed it directly at Joshua's throat. Bastard, take your hands away. She is not the wife of the Garcia family, who can be bullied by others. My daughter, I will take her away. My eyes were warm. 3 years. The man I chose at such a risk of my life is changed beyond all recognition, but my parents are still standing by my side. The spear pierced his throat. Joshua slowly loosened his grip, with a look of reluctance in his eyes. I crawled to my father in tears, too ashamed to look up, and tremblingly said, I am an unfilial daughter. It is my fault. He looked at me in all my disgrace, his eyes stinging with pain, and asked in a heavy voice, Do you still want to follow that kid? I glanced back at Joshua. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, but I shattered it with my own words, saying with determination, No, this is not a good person. Just abandon her. Joshua was so angry after hearing this that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Stella, don't go. Joshua, please sign the divorce papers. That day, it was drizzling in March. I walked out of the Garcia mansion slowly with the divorce papers in my arms, and with a smile in my eyes I rushed towards my mother, who was anxiously waiting for me in front of the door of the Garcia mansion. Mom, Stella will never be willful again. She smiled. I laughed too. It turns out that love has never been the strongest bond in the world. Only blood relatives are the ones who stand by your side forever. In this life, I did not die on that mid-autumn festival night of family reunion. I finally walked out of the Garcia mansion that had shackled me for my entire life. From then on, I returned to the yellow sand desert. Become an anonymous military doctor. 11. Spring of the 13th year of Yongha. The Allen daughter and the Garcia son divorced. In the same year, Garcia's son was bedridden for a year and never remarried. Many years later, this Taifu Qing died at the age of 40. Before he died, his nephew was beside his bed, and in his daze he heard the minister of the imperial household muttering, Stella. He whispered, Uncle, who is Stella? I will call Stella over right now. The person on the bed had gray hair and was extremely skinny. He was smiling. Fell asleep for eternity.